Some basic understanding of trigonometric functions is required when working with vectors. Let's take a look at a circle with radius of exactly 1.0, a so-called unit circle. Any point on the circle defines a vector with length of exactly 1.0, which can be represented as its projections on the x and the y axis. The sine function of the angle between the x-axis and the vector is the length of the projection of the vector on the y-axis. This is this distance from the origin to the projection. Obviously, when the angle is 0, the projection of the vector on the y-axis is also 0, so the sine returns 0. When the vector defines an angle of 90 degrees with the x-axis, it's perpendicular to the x and parallel to the y, then the projection of the vector is the same as the vector itself, so the sine function returns 1.0. Then, when the vector defines an angle of 180 degrees, the sine goes back to 0, because the projection on the y-axis is 0. When the angle is 270 degrees, the sine is -1, and after full circle at 360 degrees, the sine is back to 0. This means that the sine function is a periodic function with a period of 360 degrees. If we continue to increment the angle beyond 360 degrees, we're getting the same results from the function. Now let's take a look at the cosine. The cosine is the projection of the vector on the x-axis, which means that when the angle between the vector and the x-axis is 0, the cosine is equal to 1, because the projection of the vector on the x is the same as the vector itself. Then, at 90 degrees, the cosine is 0. Then, at 180 degrees, it goes to -1. At 270, it's back to 0. And at 360 degrees, it reaches 1 again. The cosine function is also periodical, and it's actually very similar to the sine function. It's just offset by 90 degrees. We can plot the results by taking the x-axis as the angle, or the time in this case, because we are incrementing the angle, and at 90 frames we have 90 degrees. That means that the x in this plot displays both the time and the angle, and the y of the graph is the value of the sine and the cosine. As you can see, the sine and cosine describe the same curves, but the cosine is offset. So when the sine starts at 0, the cosine starts at 1. They both intersect whenever the angle between the x-axis and the vector is 45 degrees. Or on the opposite side, when the angle is 225, which is 180 plus 45. And then again, since both are periodic, 360 degrees plus 45 is 405 degrees. The two functions intersect again. We can easily make an object move in a circle using a scripted controller and the sine and cosine functions. Let's create